Good morning, everybody. If I could get you to go ahead and start taking your seats. Those of you still eating, please continue to eat. Enjoy lunch, courtesy of Durotech. Thank you, Durotech, for being our lunch sponsor this morning. So we'll keep eating, but we'll go ahead and get started with the program so we can get this thing moving. We got a lot of good information today to go through. First off, welcome. My name is Kyle Holland, President and CEO of AGC Houston. So thank you for joining us for the annual AGC A4LE Joint Cost Report discussion. So I can't remember, I don't know if we call this a meeting or a discussion. We've got a report, so we're going to call it the day of chatting, I guess, about costs, because that's what everybody wants to hear about. Seems to be the topic of the year right now. But again, I'd like to thank our lunch sponsor, Durotech, as well as our event sponsors, Satterfield and Pontikes Construction and VLK Architects. So thank you, sponsors. So we really appreciate everybody coming out today. This has been kind of a big staple for many years with the AGC and the A4LE working together to provide updates on what's relevant to the construction industry and how it affects the A4LE, the K-12 market, and the world in there. We've got some great content scheduled today. Before I get on to that, I'd like to give a quick AGC update for everybody, some of the things going on in the AGC world. And then I'll pass it over to Lisa Kassman to give a little A4LE update as well, and then we'll get started with our programming. So a couple big events that the AGC has coming up that it might be relevant to a lot of people in this room is, first off, is our AGC HR Safety Conference. This is a first-time event for us, but we're going to kind of combine the worlds of human resources and safety together into a one-day event on August 24th. And then the month after that, the Construction Career Collaborative, C3, I think I saw Angela somewhere. There's Angela in the back with C3. C3 and AGC are partnering together to do a workforce development conference. So we're going to kind of have that HR and safety world first, and we're going to shift the following month on September 29th to the workforce development world. You'll hear a lot about those workforce issues, I think, with some of our panelists here talking about one of those problems that everybody's dealing with in the market right now and kind of how we can address that. And then, of course, our biannual AGC Apex Gala is on September 24th. I would like to give a big thank you to everybody in this room who responded to William's email about judging our Apex Awards this week. So thank you to those judges who are coming out to hang out with us on Thursday. And that event's September 24th, so if you're interested in seeing us showcase some of those projects that our members have built over the last 2 years, let us know. We'd love to have you out for that gala at the Houstonian on September 24th. So with that, I think that's all I've got from the AGC side. I'll turn it over to Lisa to give a quick A4LE update, and then we'll get started with our program.
Welcome, everybody. Just a few updates. We met last week as a board, and we're going to be publishing our calendar events. We're going to be starting up with school tours again. We've got a couple scheduled, but we're going to encourage our architects and contractors. If you want to schedule a school tour, let us know. We can promote it for you. Maybe not necessarily as an A4LE event, but just let people come out to visit so we can see more of our great projects. We have the clay shoot coming up in November, our mixer in January at St. Arnold's, golf in March, and then Top Golf in April for social. So we have lots of good things coming up. Looking for more school people to join us, and thank you. That's all I got for now.
All right, thank you, Lisa. All right, we're going to kind of move on to the meat of the program. I guess we're going to start off with a roundtable panel discussion on cost and material issues affecting owners. So we've got a great group of panelists here, so I'm about to shift my hat from my AGC hat to my panel moderator hat. But first off, I want to let you know, some of kind of a preview of the content we've got going on today. You're going to hear about a lot of issues that are relevant to these subcontractors that do all your K-12 work. But we want to focus on not just talking about the issues, but talking about what we can do about them and what that affects. A lot of times when contractors talk construction lingo, sometimes it's hard to understand, so we're going to try to bring it down to a level that makes sense, go at a high level so everybody can understand and what that means to each of you and how you can relate to that in some of your daily lives and experiences there. So, and then we're going to talk about how those issues can be mitigated on your projects to make sure that the one goal that everybody here in this room is out for is a successful project, on time, under budget, make sure those are happening despite the unique conditions of the world today. So I'd like to introduce our panel real quick. First off, we have Randy Whidden with LECS Electrical, David Tunning with Envirotech Mechanical, and Joe Guzman with Winco Masonry. So these are our panelists, and I'm going to grab my mic over here and hop over and have a discussion with these gentlemen. All right, guys, you ready? It's your time to shine. I'm going to grab a seat over here if it's okay with y'all. All right, so we kind of talked about issues being the topic of today and how it relates to cost. So we've got a room of contractors, of architects, of owners and engineers, program managers for K through 12. Let's start off, I guess, David, you want to kind of kick us off with high level. I think we're going to start high level here, just 1 to 2 minutes, what you're seeing on a daily basis that might be different, that might be affecting those costs, and then we'll start to trickle in after that on what we can do to address those things.
Well, in general terms, the biggest impact on the cost associated with what we do is the equipment costs and labor costs, obviously. And we have gone through a number of different ideas to try to mitigate those things and try to talk to these vendors and get an understanding of exactly what's driving these cost increases that affect us all. And I know for the equipment, it was the labor shortage, it was the inability to procure materials, supply chain issues that we're all faced with. So with the shortage, obviously, we have this huge increase in prices and increase in lead times that are affecting each and every one of our projects. So that is the driving force that we're trying to struggle and deal with every single day. The rest of the items related to what we do affect us, but on a much smaller scale than those 2 points.
Randy, in your role of the electrical, anything in particular jump out at you? Obviously, there's a host of issues, but something jump out at you in your mind?
Well, I've got the same problem David does. I'm going to say the biggest issue we're facing is lead times. And some of these lead times, there's nothing we can do about them. Most of y'all in here know switchboards now are out 52 to 56 weeks. If that fits into the schedule, then that's pushing 20% of our labor down to overtime, which is ending up costing you guys because we're not getting it until late. And when we get that late, this guy's hollering, general contractors are hollering, nobody can finish the building. The biggest issue we've got is lead times. I can control the material costs from bid day to when we build your project. Now, it may not be in line with what you budgeted when you set your bond 2 years ago, but even though the costs are high, we can manage that. We can't manage the deliveries and the lead times. How do you fix it? We got to have more room in that schedule. If a switchboard's 56 weeks, he's not going to be able to turn on air till 60 weeks.
So lead times popping up. Joe, I think one other thing we kind of talked about previously is, the volatility of your pricing, right? You might bid a job and it costs one thing at bid day, and then it used to be 30 days later you might have a change. Maybe now it seems like 30 minutes later you might have a change. Talk a little bit about that so everybody can kind of understand the issues you guys are seeing when you're getting vendor pricing and pricing those and submitting your bids to contractors and the process forward from there and how that's kind of challenging.
Yeah, it's definitely volatile. From a masonry standpoint, it's not near as bad as like switchgear. Everything that we install is pretty much made here in Texas. But the manufacturers continue to struggle with the same things we do. Freight impacts everything. We have a lot of projects now where material's ready, packaged, ready to ship, but they just can't get a truck. We get price increases coming across our desk every week. I just got one yesterday on a material that we use on every project, and it went up 60%. And there's just no way to forecast it. So in short, it's just volatile. We still have a lot of manufacturers telling us to factor 10% per quarter, which is great. It's kind of a double-edged sword as a subcontractor because we can't just get carried away bidding stuff with a lot of fluff in it, or we're going to get blown out of the water. But in that particular case, 10% a quarter doesn't even begin to cover it. So, moving forward, it's just more difficult to try to capture and lock stuff up. Kind of what Randy was saying, we can capture stuff and control it if we get signed up quick. We've had several projects in the last year where we understand there's budget issues and you guys are trying everything you can to make it work. But in the meantime, a month passes, 2 months passes, well, our opportunity to lock that in and try to hold that price for everyone just went out the window. So that's really all I can say as far as materials go. It's still volatile, and hopefully it will kind of level off, but I don't know, to be honest with you.
So kind of heard a lot about that volatility, and I think all three of you guys said lock it in early, right, as a key. David, I'll kind of kick it back to you. You want to hit on maybe a solution and something from your perspective. We said this panel is not going to be just talking about the issues, but how can we solve them? I think maybe I'll speak for a lot of people in the room, probably would love to know what they can do, you know, to help their projects go successfully, to help combat some of the issues you guys are seeing so that the project's completed when it needs to be.
Yeah, we just all need to really try to expedite the award process. At the end of the day, when we get a proposal from one of our vendors, they're going to hold their price for 30 days, but understand they're going to hold that 30 days, and during that 30 days, we have to bid the project. It has to go to board for board approval. Then the district has to issue contracts to the general contractor. General contractor has to then go through their process of vetting out all of their bids, and then issue contracts to us, and then we in turn, you know, trickles downhill. We got to issue purchase orders and so forth. That typically is what, 3 months that we typically would do something. We have to do that now in 30 days, or I'm faced with a price increase. So when we're trying to mitigate that, we're trying to hold off on that, we're given deadlines, but sometimes these guys aren't even able to hold their own deadlines that they give us. And then once we're under contract, and we're subject to any price increase that happens if we aren't able to issue the purchase orders to that vendor. And so we have to really look at this with a sense of urgency. I don't know if we try to have emergency meetings with the board to try to expedite that, have contracts ready, narrow the field of who you're looking at from a contractor standpoint, so that you are ready. You don't really have to vet out those folks. You already know, you feel good about it, and we issue contracts and get it going. It's a real deal. I have 3 or 4 projects right now that I was assessed a price increase after I was already under contract, and they basically said, if you want it, you're paying it. And and I go back and talk to the general contractor about it, and they're like, too bad, bud, you're under contract. And that puts us in a tough position. And, you know, it's difficult enough doing what we do. And if we can all come together to try to come up with these ideas to expedite that award process, I think is going to be beneficial. It's going to save you guys money in the long run. And it's something that we have to seriously look at, as well as extending the schedules. You know, Randy touched on a little bit with the lead times. I got 44 to 48 weeks on a chiller. That used to be, 8 to 12 weeks. So the 14-month elementary school is not happening anymore, guys. I'm not getting a chiller from the point at which I release it, which is typically 3 or 4 months down the line from the construction process, for 48 weeks. So y'all can do the math. It's not going to happen, and we have to really seriously look at those ways to try to mitigate the exposure that we have, and ultimately you're going to see in the end result in higher prices.
Randy, Joe, anything to kind of add on that?
Yeah, I want to give y'all an example. There's a high school that's opening this year. 2 years ago when we bid that job, it was about 45 days when we went through the VE process and all of the rigmarole to get contracts issued. When we bid the job, we bid it at that day's commodity prices with 5% on them for copper. By the time that contract was issued, 45 days later, we were looking at a $1 million copper loss. In 45 days, our cost of copper went from $2 million to $3 million. There's not a contractor here that can stomach a $1 million loss in 45 days because of the issuance of the contract. Were we able to work it out? Yeah, we were. But did it cost the owner some money? It did. We've got to shorten that process.
So sometimes, before I get to you, Joe, I think I got something I'll tee up for you. Some of those decisions, obviously, with the way the bond process works and the approval process, can be challenging to deal with that. But what suggestions are there, I guess, pre-bid involving you guys early to help pick some of those materials? Joe, you mentioned a lot of your materials made here, but certainly you've got some overseas products that, a lot of the architects in the room might be interested to hear about, product selection and how that process goes, and kind of engaging you guys on the front end where feasible. Talk a little bit about that as a way to kind of help the process as well.
Yeah, definitely. Right now the manufacturers, they're running at capacity. They have the same struggles we do, getting people, keeping their facilities, fully operating, and trucking. But, right now, my recommendation, especially on a masonry standpoint, is to stick with materials and designs that are commonly used. When you go to someone that's a huge company like Acme Brick or, someone like that, and you ask them to make something that's kind of unique, well, it's really disruptive to them. And a lot of times they can, if you use something that they're already going to make a couple $100 million of or whatever, it's not as big a deal to work that in. And, inevitably the world we live in, we have changes every day. And, it's one thing to order all the materials 6 months in advance and have them ready to go. It's another thing to be halfway through the project and say, oh, we need to add this or that. Can you get more? If it's a commonly used product, it's not a huge deal, but if it's something that's kind of one-off, it's a major deal. And, a lot of times just switching colors or shapes, it totally stops what they're doing, and it's just disruptive. So, kind of what David was saying, definitely get us on board earlier. And, I understand that right now drawings and whatnot are getting pushed out quickly, but just be ready to go on decisions and be open-minded to alternatives. We had a problem with one of our products at the beginning of the year, and we tried to change some things up to a different, just a different manufacturer, to be honest with you, but it's a newer product that meets a newer ASTM. As far as an aesthetic or a performance standpoint, it wouldn't have changed anything, but we simply could not get it approved because it wasn't in the spec, and I really just don't understand, it really didn't impact anything, and I thought it was a good, solution for a problem. So just being ready to go, make decisions, being open-minded on alternatives, and trying to stick with stuff that they're really producing and is common.
Good point. That flexibility as you go through the process seems to be a key, helpful factor for getting that, kind of mitigating that risk. I'll kind of pause. We got some more, I think, topics to hit on, but I want to kind of open it up to questions. If anybody has any, we've talked about a lot. Start with Lisa. Yes.
What do you think about the owner buying some of this long lead equipment ahead of time?
So question was, what do we think about the owner buying some of the long lead equipment ahead of time?
That's a touchy subject, Lisa. That's why I looked at David. There's an unloading issue, a storage issue, and the biggest issue is the warranty issue. If something happens to that, is it on me? Is it on you? That's where the contractors are going to put up a fight.
Well, I think we have to think about whether or not you feel confident that you're going to continue on with the project. So you can bid just the equipment and switchgear, and you can get that going, but you've yet to bid the project in its totality. Then if you bid that project and it's severely over budget, and it's something that you can't get done budget-wise, then what are you going to do with the fact that you've already released us to go ahead and procure this equipment? We can't cancel that order without there being a huge cost associated with it, if at all. So we need to think about those things before doing it. It certainly can help with that process. There's just more thought that has to go into whether or not you feel supremely confident that you're going to move forward with that project regardless.
Any other questions before we kind of move on? Yes, sir.
So you all mentioned the volatility issue. I'm curious about whether, I would assume this has happened before, so I'm curious about what the cycle is like. When do these come out of this?
So great question. We were going to get to that, but I'll go now. The question was about the volatility and the cycle and how we've kind of seen this before, where it's ups and downs, and I think question as to where we see that now and if and when it might change.
I can speak on copper, and originally we thought it was going to kind of resolve itself in the fall of 2020. It obviously hadn't. A month ago, copper was in the 475s. 2 weeks ago, it fell down to about 325, and today it's back up to 355. I mean, it's changed, and you can go from 1 week, and 5 days later, you may be at a 20% increase. And rest assured, on the validity of the commodity market, when that price goes up, the manufacturers adjust their pricing instantly. When it falls, they don't adjust their pricing. So, I mean, it's a day-to-day thing. And like I said earlier, we try to put 5% on copper to try to cover any fluctuations. And historically, over my 20-year career, we've been good with that. It's obviously not where we're at now. When do we think it's going to stabilize? Some economists are saying 317 is the magic mark. Some are expecting copper to trade over the next year at $2.70 to $3. They're expecting a recession. No matter where you go, you're going to get two different answers. So to answer your question, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I pretty much agree with Randy. every time we think things were going to level off, we get another price increase. You know, some of the stuff that flew high quickly in 2020, they've obviously kind of leveled off, but some of the stuff like Portland cement is in everything, concrete, masonry. If you really zoom out on the graph and look at, say, the last 5 years, it's really not that high or that radical. So I think there's a lot of materials that, you know, if anyone's hoping that they'll see a decrease in pricing, you know, barring a major recession with major layoffs and an oversupply situation, I just don't think that's going to happen. I think our best hope is that things possibly level off or stabilize a little bit.
In the 30 years or so that I've been in the business, I have not seen anything to this drastic of change. And the reality is that we've sat in this room in years past and talked about the labor shortage that we have, the aging workforce, and things like that. So we are continuing to see an increase in wages. You're never going to see the cost on goods come down to a point coupled with the labor increases that you're going to see a correction, if you will, back to where things were before. I think that ship has sailed.
David, I'll let you kind of keep going on that topic. We talked a lot, I think, the other day about labor. You hit on labor as an issue. I know we've been talking a lot about materials. You know, let's start on labor so that everybody in the room can kind of realize some of the struggles you guys are dealing with in regards to labor. I think labor is the answer that, you know, the solution can vary widely, but at least go ahead and hit on that so that everybody can kind of understand where you guys are coming from in regards to the labor challenges.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, it's very difficult to find folks that are really enthusiastic about working in our industry. And then those that do, there's this sort of expectation that they're going to be paid at a price point that is really unrealistic to what we can afford with our job costs. And so when, I think we talked about it the other day when we were having discussions about this, when you have Target paying $25, $26 as a minimum, and you've got Buc-ee's paying $22 an hour to just come in and work for a company like that as their base pay, I think it's difficult for us to catch up with the expectations that kids nowadays, you know, they want to work in the air conditioning. They certainly don't want to work out in the heat for anything less than, I mean, they all expect to make $100,000 a year. We just can't afford it. There's just absolutely no way that we can pay the kind of wages that these kids expect. And so, therefore, you have, with an aging workforce and so many people retiring, it's hard to find people. That's the bottom line. So we have to pay more. And eventually we've been able to insulate you guys from that because of competition. We've absorbed some of those costs. Well, the reality is nobody's going to be able to continue to absorb that for long. So you guys are going to ultimately be impacted by it.
Great point. And again, that labor issue is something that is not necessarily solvable, but there's organizations, you know, C3 being one of them, AGC, looking to push that, all of our member companies trying to push and figure out what's the magic answer. And so, you know, just understanding what the problem is and how it relates to, you know, you're right, we're talking about Starbucks and people going to be baristas for $18 an hour versus a laborer, and what that means for bringing people into our industry. We kind of cut off the questions. Any questions before we kind of keep going? Did I miss any, or anybody have any other? Yep.
If we get out in front and we secure these agreements and we release U.S. subcontractors to make those orders, are you saying that your manufacturers and your suppliers are willing to, I mean, they're going to hold that price, you actually get an agreement signed with them, or they put provisions in there to give themselves out? Because we're running into problems where we do everything up front and we still get backlash where some of them say, we're not going to hold it, we're not going to sign this agreement, you know, and that's coming at the supplier level.
So for those of you online or who couldn't hear, a question about, you know, if we go through the effort to lock in the subcontract early, order with the vendors, are the vendors going to guarantee the price once the product is ordered, or are they going to continue to play those games with those costs? I think it sounds like a general contractor seeing that, where there are some increases after the order is made. So if you guys can hit on that a little bit.
As of now, on the electrical side, once that PO is issued to distribution and that order is released, our price is set. Now, there's been some rumors here lately that Square D is going to try to start giving us budget numbers, and final pricing will be determined upon shipment of the board. But so far, we haven't seen that on the electrical side. I get a contract, I issue a PO, I can lock that price in now. I really don't believe the square D rumor. I think on the electrical side, we issue a PO, there's our price. Now, they may tell us 52 weeks and it takes 60, but I think we're gonna be okay on the price.
Well, I echo the same things that Randy was talking about, but we did hear some rumors with some manufacturers, and I think it varies from manufacturer to manufacturer. But there were rumors that there were certain manufacturers that were impacted so severely and trying to play catch up so much that even after you issue a purchase order and you release for fabrication and shipment, that they might come back and levy a price increase and just tell you that's the way it is and too bad. Now, I have not witnessed that. I have been given a lot of restrictions that I've tried to pass on through the chain to make everybody understand the time frame that I have and what I need done in that time frame to secure it. And so far, they've been able to honor that. The problem that I've mostly ran into, what we talked about earlier, is not being able to get those things done in a timely manner, and then they're levying it. But once we issue the purchase order, so far, they've been able to hold it.
Real quick, I've heard similar things from the roofing industry. I know we don't have any roofing subcontractors on the panel, but roofing is one of those materials that I have heard from a lot of our members that is doing that, where they won't guarantee price until the material is shipped, let alone ordered. So kind of some variety there, but Joe, you got anything to add on that?
Yeah, kind of the same thing. I think for the most part, most of the suppliers or manufacturers are going to be reasonable and recognize that you guys, as the owners and design firms, are putting the foot forward to try to get them on board and work with them. So is there going to be some that aren't going to play ball? Probably, but I think for the most part, I think most of the manufacturers are going to be a team player, and that will ultimately help your project.
And I'll kind of give a pub for some of these guys. I think David mentioned it earlier, maybe being a little more selective on the subcontractors you use, who are going to have that reputation to hold that and hold their vendors accountable for some of that, might make an impact as well. I think we had a question over here.
On the releasing of the purchase orders, is the price being held all the way through the end of submittals, or is it once you issue the PO, it's locked in, or is it at the end of the submittals being approved, it's locked in?
Question about when the price is locked in, whether it's at the end of submittals or issuance of the PO.
Issuance of PO, I have to issue the PO before they'll even do a submittal. So once I issue that, we're good unless the engineer makes a drastic change on the switchboards.
We have to have a complete approved submittals prior to issuance of the purchase order, because they're not going to release that in case there is some change or there's some issue with the submittal process, because once they enter that order, for them to change that order, there's usually a cost impact. So what the vendors are telling us is that they need to have approved submittals as well as the purchase order.
So David, that kind of goes back to your earlier point about the process of cutting that PO. Now submittals are factoring into that, obviously. So if you're going to be able to cut that early, not only do you need the contract to somewhat lock in your price, you've got to have submittals. So that submittal turnaround kind of becomes even quicker. I don't know if you want to add anything on that.
Well, certainly the submittals are a big part of it, because with the risk that we are taking and they're taking to go ahead and release that equipment, if there is an issue with their submittal, then the penalties that these guys are getting, and then getting further in the production line with already extended lead times, it just poses all kinds of problems. And so they're not really confident that in going ahead and releasing that equipment without approved submittals. So from their perspective, they're not really wanting to do that or willing to do that. And again, that's sort of case-by-case basis. There are some manufacturers who have tremendous relationships with a particular engineer, and they feel confident that maybe their basis of design and that they're going to have everything approved without any particular issue, and then they're going ahead and stepping on out there and releasing it prior to having approved submittals. That's sort of some of the relationship things that we have with some of these guys. We'll call in the favors and ask them to do those things, and we're having conversations behind the scenes, making sure that there's no issue even without formal approved submittal. But in general terms, that's the expectation, to have the approved submittals.
All right, question over here.
So how much are y'all seeing, you know, Randy, you mentioned, for instance, the switchgear being 48 weeks to 52 weeks or something like that. If you have something that's ordered and delivered, instead of it showing up at 48 weeks, they all of a sudden add another 30 weeks to the end, you've got to switch manufacturers. Same with HVAC. Are y'all seeing that a lot? We're having it happen a lot, so I'm wondering.
Question about lead times being given when material is ordered, and then instead of 44 weeks, it becomes 52 weeks, and how these guys are seeing that.
The problem we're having with that, and we just had it on a generator. It was supposed to have been here, I don't know, 52 weeks, and now it's going to be 64 weeks. But by the time they told us there was a delay, there wasn't an option to switch to another manufacturer, because they don't tell you until you're at the 48-week mark that, hey, you're supposed to be there in 4 weeks, but it's not going to be there until 12 weeks. We haven't had, the generator's the only issue we've had in almost that one. Things have been pushed a week, 2 weeks. Nothing major, but I don't see that there's time to switch to another manufacturer. And we sit here and talk about the major gear manufacturers. Honestly, they're not worried about the K through 12 market. They're not worried about LECS. They're not worried about anybody in this room. If Elon Musk calls and wants something, he's getting it. If Jeff Bezos needs it, he's getting it. We're a small fish in that big pond, so we can scream, we can yell, we can holler. We're just at their mercy, and the only way we're going to solve that, guys, is time. Give us more time to get that equipment.
I think for the most part, the lead times, once they tell us what they are, they're able to meet those, with the exception of, for us, a few weeks, because they're telling us there's some transportation issues as well. They're having problems getting trucks. They're having problem finding drivers. So when you have an expectation of a specific date, sometimes that does slide a week or two for just transportation issues alone.
Question in the back.
Just on the flip side of that, from a manufacturer standpoint, we ask when the job's going to start, and they're given a schedule, and we go ahead and manufacture, and because of all the things that are happening prior to our application being used, that product may sit there for 3, 4, sometimes 5 months. And, we've gone back saying, maybe we need to have some storage, we need to take the, from the manufacturer's standpoint, on the flip side of that, it's difficult to that as well.
I guess a concern was raised from the manufacturer's standpoint. I mean, sometimes things are ordered and then they might arrive or be ready and sitting in a warehouse for several weeks due to some other schedule issues.
I think that's definitely a real problem, and I think that just depends on from contractor to contractor. But generally, in terms of the projects that we work on, the general contractors we work for, they're like, bring it on. We're actually we're fortunate enough that we have some space. We'll store it at our facility, and then we'll double handle it a little bit, just because we know then that at least we have it on site, or within our ability to be able to get it out there when we need it out there. So not all contractors have that ability for laydown space. A specific project may not have sufficient laydown space. Then at that point, then you're probably going to be looking at trying to work it out to where there are some external storage costs associated with it, because you have minimal amount of room, and once it builds up, you've got to get it out the door.
Safe to say, guys up here, you'd probably prefer, and maybe some of the generals in the room, prefer some added handling, added storage costs to have the material when you call for it?
Ship it. I'm going to say ship it. And I know Gary raised his hand there with spring. I sat in a meeting with Gary 2 years ago about some fixtures that were coming early, and he was very good about working with us. Yes, they were coming early. How are we going to store them? But the owner was also willing to fund us for those. We're seeing, 52-week lead time. It shows up in 30 weeks. Hey, ship it, ship it, ship it, ship it. Goes back to the owners. Pick your contractors wisely, especially if you pay for it. You want to make sure the guy's going to be here in 2 years.
So,
Question over here.
half the audience is probably going to throw stuff at me. But
he said half the audience is going to throw stuff at him, so everybody get ready.
Are we using the wrong delivery methods? Should we be looking at contractor as agent rather than CM at risk or CSB? That way we selecting the subs, we're getting the subs on, we're the contractor, we're the general contractor rather than having a general contractor, which is why half the audience will throw stuff at me.
Question is whether the wrong delivery method is being used and whether it should be a CM agent instead of a CM at risk model. Any of
obviously
you guys want to wade into that?
That's obviously a very touchy subject as a subcontractor, right? But I mean, I think it goes back to, being ready to go up front, getting the orders in place, and trying to do a better job of nailing down the schedule. Because I know Bob, he's a block manufacturer. His stuff's heavy, and on a big job we could go through 2-3 loads of material a day, so it's just not feasible to ship that to our yard and sit on it. I mean, we're talking millions of pounds of material, and I mean, they don't have an infinite amount of space out there. So to kind of answer your question, I think you just got to get on it quicker.
Didn't Texas City try that a couple of years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, as a contractor agent? Is anybody from Texas City in here? I know they tried it on 2 elementary schools, and if I'm going off memory, and somebody in here may be able to correct me, I don't think they opened on time. I think you have to have that general contractor, that construction manager, for the coordination purposes, to make sure the schedule's on place. I like the CMAR route because it does give you some leeway in picking your contractors. You can work with the general contractor to pick them, whereas if it's CSP, 5 general contractors, 15 electrical, somebody's going to have a bust. That's the guy you're going to end up stuck with.
I echo the same sentiments. I don't think and would not advise that method personally. I think that you really do need to have general contractor expertise to help mitigate some of the things that we're dealing with. And I think that you're going to be dealing with things that you're not used to dealing with, and you're probably not going to want to continue to deal with it after you do 1 or 2. There's a lot of things that those guys deal with that probably is some things that you don't even realize.
Any other questions in the audience? I think we're nearing the end, but I love the discussion and the good questions coming out of this. Anything else? All right, I'll kick it back to our panelists. So I guess for some final thoughts, if each of you guys want to kind of offer up something, you've, I think, given the audience some great information and some solutions to these problems, so that everybody's kind of aware of what you guys are dealing with and can hopefully, help the process to get these jobs completed on time and under budget. But closing thoughts?
Yeah, to kind of hit back on what these two said earlier about the labor issue, that is definitely our biggest concern moving forward, is getting like David said, our workforce is aging out, and we just don't have a steady stream of young people coming into the trades. And money is just not the motivator that it was for the past generations. Every summer we go through a cycle on K through 12. We've got to get in there and get it knocked out before the kids get back. And inevitably we end up working a lot of overtime. And I can tell you right now that, most of the people that are younger than 30 don't want to work Saturday. They don't want to work Friday. And that kind of dovetails back into what they're saying about schedules taking longer. I mean, even if we are successful at getting the people that we have historically, our productivity is down. It's down for a multitude of reasons, whether we're waiting on people in front of us, we're waiting on equipment, or we just don't get the production we used to. So I think part of the, bigger solution of getting more people into the workforce or in the construction trades is going to be revisiting some of the status quo stuff. The schedules are going to get longer. They don't want to work Saturdays. We're competing against companies that a lot of people can work from home. They can work from home or they can work remote. They get to set their hours. They don't necessarily have to work Monday through Friday, 7 to 3:30. And it's just hard to compete with that. I mean, right now, if you're a young person and you're going into the workforce, why wouldn't you go work for someone like that and work in the AC making close to the same money? So I think, there's no doubt that wages will go up. We're going to have to buy our way back into it when things go up because, I mean, I think there was a number saying we're like 99% of where we were pre-pandemic. But really going into that time frame, we came down, at least our company did down. I think a lot of the major subcontractors did. We're down 20, 30%, and we're like at a gridlock. We just can't seem to hire more people, and when things turn around and there's a lot of work, we're going to have to borrow our way back. But, you know, unlike in previous years, I don't necessarily think that money is going to be the ultimate solution. I think we're going to have to recognize the desires and wants of the younger generation and try to curtail to that.
I'll agree with him that labor is going to be an issue. I don't think it's the electrician's biggest issue because, as he said, we can buy that back. We may lose some money doing it, but we as a contractor are in complete control of that. We are not in control of these manufacturers and our materials and our equipment. And all you guys really want is your school to open on August 15th. When you back it up from there, the most important thing to get it open is permanent power. Well, we know the lead times, guys. Back up from that date a year, 12, 14 months from that date to get these schools open. We can overcome labor. It's going to cost us money, and in the future it's going to cost your projects to go up. But your immediate term, your schools this year, your schools next year, your schools the following year, you got to give us time to get the power on and get that school finished. So if I was asking for one thing for y'all to take notice of, talk to that construction manager, find out when he needs permanent power, back it up from there, figure out when you want to bid the job from there, because bidding and building an elementary school in 14 months, it's not going to happen, guys. And somebody's going to think they can pull it off, the switchboard's not going to be available, and now all of a sudden the school's not going to open. We have to have the time to get the equipment, because that is the one thing we can't control are these manufacturers.
I think we talked a lot about the things that are impacting us, and you know, we're kind of where we are now with projects that have already been budgeted, that are already getting ready to bid or have already bid. I think that, you know, you guys may already know this, but at this point, you got to prioritize your projects. The bottom third of your projects, you might as well shelve them now. Projects that you have that are out now. And then moving forward, as you look at trying to budget new projects and new bonds or whatever you're looking at, don't be afraid to go ahead and pay for some pre-construction services. Go ahead, and everybody has relationships, whatever contractors and subcontractors that you have good relationships with, that you feel confident have a good pulse of where everything's at. Go ahead and hire those guys and let them help with the budget so that we basically have more realistic budgets to start with. Too often times, I mean, every single job we're looking to VE, and we get beat up about it a lot about how we're too high. Well, sometimes, and I mean no disrespect, sometimes I feel like we've forgotten to start with the premise that maybe the budget wasn't good in the first place. And so let us help you guys put more realistic budgets together. That way, there's a lot less tension later on when we're trying to get these things in budget, facing the things that we're facing in our new reality.
I see a question in the back before we close real quick.
Who's the owner's advocate with the municipalities as far as permitting process? Because City of Houston is ridiculous on the length of time for permitting projects. They no longer let you do packages or anything through. They want the whole process. They won't let us do alternates on our bid packages. So y'all talk about wanting us to have our ducks in a row. Who's our advocate on the owner's side?
Question about the municipalities and the permit process, which AGC has connections there and is in discussions with a lot of our members. I think to properly answer that question would require a whole nother seminar, but we have some relationships. I know there's been a lot of turnover in the city that's led to some of their struggles. We had a previous advocate within the permit office that was helping us get through and working to get those back with the new staff that's over at the permit office. So it is a struggle that a lot of our members deal with as well, and so we understand the issues there and are trying to spearhead that as best we can at the AGC in particular. All right, well, I guess we can close this panel up. Big hand for our panelists here. Thank you guys for sharing everything. guess am I on here? With that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Bob Richardson with Durotech to do a cost presentation to kind of go through the cost report and wrap us up.
Okay, thank you, Randy. Okay, right now, everybody in this room has two things exactly in common. Number one, the AC is low, so you're getting kind of warm. Number two, everybody you work for, your clients, your administrators, your bond committees, your board, they all expect you to be clairvoyant. Everyone is expected to be clairvoyant. Maybe some people are. What we're going to do today is something a little bit different. We may run a little bit long, but the next to the last slide, we are trying to position you where you can at least be in a position, if you're not clairvoyant, where you can explain to your constituencies really what's going on. And then we'll follow that with the forecast. Okay. There we go. Okay. First, we're going to look at what happened already. If you think you're alone in having cost and schedule problems, IDC Research, an independent consulting firm, did a study a year ago just of developer projects, and they found out 75% of the developer projects nationally are over budget. And we're at least 70 days late. The AGC did its annual report at the beginning of this year, and they concluded that costs nationally were up by 24%. Internally, we have calculated Houston at about 25%, so that's running pretty close. Okay. This is from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. This is a lot of what happened to you last year. And what this is what the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics calls cost inputs. And it's running through December last year. What cost inputs are the costs of all labor, all materials, all general conditions, and even the contractor profit that goes into bids. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. You can see what happened as it started taking off in 2020 and 2021. This is the month-by-month breakdown of just the surge in construction materials, which took place in 2021. And you can see at the end of the third quarter, it really began to escalate. We're going to talk about that a little bit more as how it affected your specific building types. The supply chain pressure index is very important. This is on the whole web of materials that flows all across the planet. It's the manufacturers and it's the distribution systems. And this is tracking what happened with costs just in that network. The money supply inflation has impacted everyone. What happened as a result of stimulus, we've got a 20% increase in the money supply during 2020 and 2021. Those impacts are carrying forward all the way into 23. This is actual from our survey of Houston subcontractors on what happened with materials prices. And we do the same survey every year. If you look at the top blue line, what that is those are materials prices, the other lines are labor, profit, and so on. The 13.6% is at the end of 2021, beginning of 22. That's what the subcontractors' projected materials costs would be in 21. Instead, it wound up at 29%. Okay? The dotted line is what they project it will be this year, which is a little bit in excess of 18%. If you look at the orange line, which was their projection of labor, the actual labor costs wound up about 50% higher than their projections, projected to go up another 10. Now, if you look at the red line at the very bottom, they hope to get a 1.4% increase in profits. Instead, they were underwater by 1.7%. That's the entire market. And what that means is the deviation is over 3.1%. This is going back to the input costs, and this is showing you the composite of the input costs and what you are getting as a bid. The blue is what you're getting as a bid. The red is the cost the contractors are incurring. And what happens is, as you heard some of the panel members say, typically the costs can be absorbed. They have run away. It took everybody a while to see how far they're running away. They're underwater, and they begin to aggressively raise their prices to try and get into the black. The blue line is a profit number. It's still too low, so you will probably see going forward some increases. This is the material cost projection in the last couple of years of the Houston subcontractors. And you can see they were on the money 2020, 2021 ran away. They're projecting about 18.3% this year, which is 1.5% per month. Well, if you average out 20 and 21, it really works out to about 18%. This is the index of global freight costs. This has affected you in the past, but this is also going to affect everything you're doing going forward. We're going to go a little bit detail of this because everything is really spread out overseas. It's changing, it's coming back, but you're going to be impacted significantly by what the freight costs are and what the delivery costs are, which is part of it. This is a ton equivalent unit. Ton equivalent unit's a 20-foot long steel box. That's how everything gets shipped overseas, goes on container ships, gets even carried on trucks. It was about, in January of 21, a little bit over $4,000 to get a container from Shanghai to Houston. A little bit about $4,000. And it took off throughout the year as a result of COVID effects and a lot of things being delayed, and ended up the year around $10,000. Right now, it's a little under $7,000 to get a container, and we'll look at those numbers in detail, to get a container from Shanghai to LA Long Beach. This is an excellent article by a guy who was a truck driver. That's his picture. He went back to college, quit driving truck. Now he works on supply chain management, and he's explaining what's really going on with trucking costs. And this is the summary of his key points. The Department of Transportation actually, in order to help the trucking industry, because they weren't being paid and the drivers weren't being paid for all the time it takes loading trucks, it can take up to 4 hours to load a truck. They weren't being paid, so they came up with some rules to help them get paid. It backfired. Okay, the shippers wouldn't follow the rules. They wouldn't pay in accordance with the rules. They switched to different vendors. But the rules are still in place. All the truck drivers now have metered drive time. There's a meter which keeps track of how long you can drive. You drive 8 hours. If you drive more than that, you get fined. Now they cannot sleep in a loading dock. You've seen the sleep over in the back of the trucks. They used to be able to go to the loading dock. It'd take up to 4 hours to load the truck, and they'd sleep, and then they'd drive for 8 hours. They're not allowed to do that anymore. They have to be awake. They're really not getting paid, so they can't rest when they want. They're limited on their drive time. So things are going slower, because if you're taking 4 hours to load a truck, you can only drive for 4 hours instead of 8. There's also a lot of problems in the trucking industry, even though they're incredibly well automated with IT. In the trucking industry, there are 3 kinds of loads. There's a dedicated load. That means you drive only for this particular shipper. That doesn't mean you're an employee. A lot of the truckloads do dedicated loads. There's a full truckload, which means that's packed. If you imagine light fixtures going to high school, that's packed. That's a full truckload. And then there's most of the shipping, which is less than truckload. And it can be something small, and what happens is there are multiple shipments in one truck with multiple stops. And what's happening is 96% of the LTL, which means less than truckload, which is not a full shipment, shippers are seeing delays of 1 to 4 days, sometimes 5 to 6. 1 and 2 of all the people shipping materials are paying for space that's empty in the trucks. And there's a lot of damage going on. So what's happening is the system efficiency is very difficult. Trucking industry gross profit margins between 1 and 3%. So this is putting a lot of pressure on their margins and drive times. This is the port of Shanghai. This is the #1 container port in the world. What this graph is showing, the red line is showing you so far this year, and as it peaks up, the longest waiting times to get in and out of the port of Shanghai. At the top of that, there were 300 ships offshore Shanghai waiting to get into the port. This happened because of the COVID lockdown in China. China was totally locked down because of COVID outbreaks. Now, if you look over at the right at the two green outlined bumps, that was last year, and those were 2 COVID lockdowns. If you go to the right, what you'll see is they cleared out the port, everything got shipped, and that's when we had a mess getting things out of LA to Long Beach, Oakland, Seattle, Tacoma, because all the freight came in there. It didn't come on a regular basis. They got bollocksed up. And if we look at the red line, we're going to see in a minute that we've got a problem developing right now on shipments coming in from the east. This also is what happened last year during COVID. Traditionally, all the shipments from China went to LA, Long Beach, or West Coast port like Oakland. But if you look at this carefully, what has happened between February and June of this year, Charleston, Newark, and Norfolk have gotten a lot of traffic directly from China. Houston, this is all containers, by the way. This is what your goods come in. Houston has increased, but what Houston's #1 trading partner is actually Vietnam. It isn't China yet. Houston Ship Channel can't take the largest draft heavy containers. They can come here because the Panama Canal was widened. Houston Ship Channel right now is being dredged to take those. And you'll start to see that traffic increase. 1 ton equivalent unit on the 26th of July from the West Coast to LA Long Beach cost a little under $7,000. That's what the shipping cost is. Cost $10,000 to get it to an East Coast port. But everybody is starting to ship to the East Coast ports because of the delays getting out of the West Coast. Houston, their ton equivalent volume, which is all the containers, was up 106% June over June and up 25% year to date. This top line was the container volume at the West Coast ports. The bottom line is where we are right now at the East Coast ports from China. The East Coast ports get as much as the West Coast ports, and they're going to cross. That means we're still going to be paying a little bit more for some materials if we don't get them to Houston because they're being shipped all the way around to the East Coast, then shipped west versus the way they were shipped before. This is going to be a situation which can continue. Now, as of the 13th, the Port of LA Long Beach had a record number of container imports. It never had so many container imports. The dock workers contract on the West Coast expired on June 30th. They're continuing to work, but if they can't reach a good settlement, there'll be a walkout, there'll be a huge jam out on the West Coast compounded by all of the truck drivers. Rail service is an issue for the Port of Los Angeles. They're having trouble getting trains in and out. There is a possibility of a rail strike. And on the 13th, there were 27,000 containers sitting on the docks at the Port of Los Angeles. That means they've been offloaded, they're full, they're waiting for trucks or rail to get them out of the Port of Los Angeles. The Port of Los Angeles, they were running 14 to 21 days to get them out of there. Port of Los Angeles decided, okay, well, legislate a solution. So they're charging $1,000 additional to take, $100 additional to take every container off a ship and put it on the dock, and then $100 a day. Were very happy about the fact that they reduced their wait time on the docks to 8.5 days. Well, if you do the math, 8.5 days is really $900. $100 offload makes it $1,000. $1,000 is the difference between a shipment going to Los Angeles from China and a shipment going to Houston. Keep that in mind. It also reduces the shipments to the East Coast by $1,000 a day. This figure, as of this morning, or actually yesterday, is there are 35,000 containers sitting on the docks at the Port of Los Angeles, okay? What that means is slower shipments. And it's going to take a while to dredge the Houston Ship Channel to create an additional Gulf Coast port of entry. In the meantime, while this is going on, there are 25,000 containers now, actually more, but this is the 13th, in the exact same situation at the Port of Long Beach, which is actually increasing its capacity, increasing its unloads, but they're still under the same penalties. These fees are having to be paid by the drivers who pick it up. If you saw 2 weeks ago the truck drivers deliberately blockading the Port of Oakland, this is what it's about, plus this. The California Assembly has passed a bill called AB 5. It was intended to protect truckers, and it's backfiring. And it started because some of the truck lines fired some of the drivers, told them they had to be independents, but they could continue to work for them. So the California said, well, if you're going to do that, you have to prove you're independent. You have to prove you have an operating authority. Operating authority costs $20,000. The guys can't afford it. The Trucking Association thinks they could lose an enormous amount of drivers. This will affect costs and time. Going to something more specific, these are some of the materials costs. Randy was talking about copper. When we try to compare it year to year, as of March, it was $462, which was a 15% increase. If you, we'll get to the bottom line in a minute. If you look at the iron ore, it was $150. It went down by 9%. Aluminum went $166. These are raw materials. $1.66, 66% increase. And the dry Baltic rate, which is how ore is shipped, had gone up 30%. In line with what Randy was saying about price volatility in May, the dry Baltic rate was $3,400 a day. What's happened now in July, this is spot market last week, copper was $331, iron ore dropped to $106, aluminum's down to $110, and the Baltic rate falls with them. What this is this is speculators, commodity traders liquidating their positions. What's really going to happen is Russia is a major producer of copper. Russia is a major producer of aluminum. Russia is a major producer of iron ore and pig iron. Pig iron is, you take the iron, you smelt it down, it goes into an ingot that's about this big. It's about that big around. That's how it gets shipped to plants for manufacturing. So Russia is not knocked out of the market yet, but they will be shortly, and that's going to impact costs. Getting more specifically and locally, if you look at the far right-hand column, this was the cost range of elementary schools last year starting at the top, 208 to 337, middle schools, 208, 253. We do have numbers on the high schools, but there aren't enough really to establish a universe of costs. The middle schools are also affected by product type. They have more footage, so it drives the cost per foot down. This is how it's graphed. If you look at the elementary schools beginning, 2018 all the way to 2020, and you look at that bottom curve, the pattern is, the same pattern is now starting to form in the middle schools. We may see a breakout soon in the prices of middle schools, which have been quite affordable. Here's what happened in the Houston market last year. We're using elementary schools as an example because there's a lot of them. In the first quarter, the elementary schools averaged out over the market about $231 a square foot. But in the second quarter, which if you remember that stair-step graph on how materials escalate, in the second quarter, they came in at $293.78 a foot. And technically what's happened is the second quarter, after second quarter, we see a slowdown in bidding. If it had continued at that pace, and we ran the projections internally, that would have run up to $306 a foot. But the product didn't come out because of delivery schedules. The design professionals going forward, their opinions on where costs are this year is they see elementaries between 240, 235, next year 260 to 350, 2024 290 to 375 a foot. Middle schools stay pretty firm at 260 to 350, 276 to 322, and then breaking 300 full-time in 2024. In the high schools, 287, 305, and then escalating in the last 2 years. Curriculum cost impact is pretty steady. The design expectations can remain steady. What's happening is junior high design expectations have fallen. That's kind of in line with the pattern of a future price change. This is a very important chart, and you've already heard some of it. These are the concerns the design professionals have expressed. Green is this year. Everyone is pushing harder for longer design schedules. If you look at the next one, construction schedules, every year, everybody's voting is going up and up on longer construction schedules, just reinforcing what you've heard your panel tell you. You look at the next two, permit times and utility problems, they're absolutely consistent as a problem. These are solvable, but these are solvable by owners, by early releases on some of these things. This is a study which just came out about apartments around the United States by the National Association of Home Builders and Multifamily Council. And they found that over 40% of their new construction costs were due to regulations. Everybody here has experience with regulations, but what some of these things do have is a carrying cost associated with the delays of permits, a construction cost associated with delays in permits and utilities. Most of their delay, which down at the very bottom, not including charts, about 0.5%, they push it into land carry costs rather than construction. Looking at our survey of subcontractors for this year, if you look at the bottom right-hand corner, everybody's projecting about this is the average for the community, projecting about an 8.6% cost increase, about a 4% increase in their profit margin, but there's a problem. If you look at this number here at the average of all trades, they're projecting an 18+% increase in materials and a 10% plus increase in labor costs. That's a problem. It's not adding up with what the differential is on cost increase. So there may be some upward pressure. We may see more of that red line extending over the blue, but everybody's sensitive to it, so they're gonna have to play catch up. However, if you look at this is the labor line. And this is estimated versus actual for 2020. It was up about a 5% increase. Then in 2021, estimated actual was up 50%. Well, if you look at those two, that means there was a 14.5% increase in labor costs over 2 years to projecting an additional 10%. This is exactly what your panel was talking about. This is where the pressure is coming from the labor, and we have some statistics that will show this out better. Subcontractors' major concerns, if we go percentage-wise, it's in kind of the rose color. 26% are concerned about the economy on the far right. 20% are concerned about materials, but if you look at the labor, 19% are concerned about labor costs. In line with materials, materials is a huge cost exposure. 19% are concerned about the labor situation. Looking at the economy overall, we like to use Northern Trust because they're very conservative. And these are their projections for 2022-23. You can see GDP falling. Look at the unemployment. It's pretty much the same. This is kind of what a lot of economists are having problems with. They have a little box that has a definition of what a recession is, and it has to meet these things, and they're not adding up. Now, the Conference Board in New York in January, they had projected inflation continuing through 2023. Jamie Dimon is chairman of Morgan Stanley. Will show their projection imminent on recession. But he's got an interesting statistic he came out with. He and Morgan Stanley people are expecting a 10-year baby boom. 10-year boom in consumer spending. What that means to you and the effect to you is this is a demographic thing with later marriages, and this is going to result in more rooftops. AECOM and Jacobs, their chairman, in the first quarter both came out. This was immediately before the invasion of Ukraine, that they see a global infrastructure boom, multi-year growth in major capital projects. That's actually happening. And that's part of the problem that economists have reconciling what's going on. However, we now have an energy impact from Russia and a major impact in supplies of aluminum, copper, iron ore, and we're going to see a future defense impact in a minute. There's a disconnect, or seeming one, but it's really not. Ken Simonson with AGC, their economist, projects actually high bid prices, but a continued expenditure in capital goods. We're used to hearing CPI, that's consumer price. Capital goods are the market that everyone in this room is in. A school is capital goods. So the backlog is there, and today, the economist for ABC, another construction trade industry association, came out with a similar projection today. This is actually the Dodge Index of momentum projects going forward. In June, it was actually up to the level that it was 14 years ago. Year to date in June, non-residential building was up 13%, and non-building was down 2%. This changed in July. Some of the residential slowed, some of the commercial non-residential slowed, and non-building construction, translation infrastructure, was up 13%. So we're starting to see some of that impact. This are the recession projections. Everybody hears about recession, but none of the economists are really confident in recession. The White House says there is no recession. That's because everything doesn't fit the definition of what we got. But everybody across the board, all these major people, they're all saying there will be a recession. The question is, when does it hit and how severe is it? And everybody really is kind of in line with Bank of America and Merrill Lynch. They're mild. One of the things, by the way, that's affected the consumer price index so much is energy price increases. 1/3 of the increase in the consumer price index this year has been due to oil prices, even though oil only makes up 7% of the index. This is the differential, as an example, between West Texas Intermediate on January 3rd and on June 23rd, and the same with Brent, which is North Sea, for the same period, showing the impact. But while all this is going on, this is an example of what some of the economists are saying for the construction industry. What this is in June of last year, Coldwell Banker, commercial, said that the U.S. needs 330 million square feet of new warehouses by 2025. You drive around Houston, you're seeing a lot of that. NAIOP, another trade organization, in February of this year, forecast 400 million square feet of net absorption. Net absorption is new leases minus vacancies, move-outs, equals how much additional space was increased. And they said there's going to be 334 million square feet absorbed. That's 750 million square feet of new warehouse distribution space. In Houston last year, Houston had 22 million feet of net absorption, and Houston right now is number 1 in big box construction. There's 2 million square feet of additional warehouses under construction, about 3.5 more will start this year. There'd be a lot more. They can't find the land at the price that they need. What's happening and what this means to you is 2 things. There's a new aggressive competitor for land prices, and they're willing to pay a lot more for land because there's huge demand for warehouses. So you have a new direct competitor to buying sites. In addition, and it's a direct competitor because most of the Houston area, indeed restrictions, is open for usage. In addition, what's happened is originally it was 22 feet clear from slab to bottom of deck in a warehouse. Then it moved to 33 feet. Now it has moved to 37 feet. So there's an additional, with the exact same footprint of warehouse, there's an additional 20% more in concrete, additional 20% more in steel, additional 20% more in rebar. So this is some of the pressures that you're seeing. Part of it is supply chain. For example, Southdown used to be headquartered in Houston. They're the biggest cement owner in the United States, biggest cement supplier is a public company. Did a long-term study on EPA impact, found out the best thing for shareholder value, because the EPA impact cost was going to be liquidate the company. They liquidated it. They sold all the cement plants off. And not many cement plants operate in the U.S. anymore because of those regulations. Part of what Texas A&M is seeing is the effect of the war in Ukraine. What's happened is cement in Houston gets trucked in by ship, and it's coming from Turkey, except Turkey gets the coal to fire their plants from Ukraine. Well, they can't get it because of the war. They got to go to new suppliers. They're raising their prices, and there's a production slowdown. So that's also impacting you. On the warehouse distribution space, you've got an ongoing competitor going for a number of years. There's 375 million square feet under construction in May in the United States. So you can forget those prior net absorption figures. Prologis is the biggest warehouse owner in the United States, maybe in the world. And they say at the present rate of absorption, the U.S. is going to be out of warehouse distribution space in 16 months. You hear a lot about Amazon. It's a drop in the bucket. The only impact they have on their vacant space, which is 10 million, they might give up about 20 million more. They'll make money on it if they give it up based on the present demand. So they're really not impactful, but they're going to be again, because what they've really done is they spent the last year building an internal real estate and construction department. They've used developers. They're going to get rid of the developers. So they're getting ready to come out again. So they will be a competitor for land and for steel. Last year they bought a lot of steel production. That's just warehouse and distribution space. Going forward, what we're going to see is more manufacturing space, and it's more expensive. This is a brand new study by Kearney & Company. And this is manufacturing executives on the left, CEOs on the right. They're telling you they're reshoring their manufacturing significantly. This is a year-over-year study on costs. If you just look at the second line, warehouse costs in the U.S. went up 31%. That's across the country. They went up 57% in Houston, and they're still building them because they can get the rental rates. I'm going to switch to labor now. This was a survey which was done last summer. About 35% of the people responding expected a change in the skill levels of workers, except it was a negative 35. Negative 81%, they saw an increase coming. What's happening today, this is a brand new survey for AGC and the bonding agents. The left is 2022, the right is 2020. Labor concerns now outweigh material concerns. You've heard the guys say that before on the panel. We'll look at that in a little more detail. It was also number one 2020. For the first time in 23 years in the history of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the construction industry unemployment is at an all-time low. So labor is being pressured. Even if none of this happens, you're going to be affected because the Davis-Bacon Act is changing. The Davis-Bacon Act was put in effect in the Depression to make sure that labor was treated fairly. In 1980, when Reagan became president to tone down inflation, they issued an administrative order to change the divisor to 50% for the prevailing wage of the market. What 50% is a wider sample which favors lower wages. And that was to pull down inflation. The Biden administration has just changed the divisor to 30%. That's going to favor higher wages, union wages. So if nothing else happens, the wages are increasing. Okay, the current labor situation, 73% of the people who raised wages, 89% are having difficulty hiring craft workers. What it is hiring qualified craft workers. And ABC, economists, and other trade association projects a shortage of 650,000 workers. What does all this mean to you? These are the influencers that we've been talking about that are impacting your price on products in this market. They're impacting your construction costs, which is impacting your building price. Inflation. There's a high probability to continue through 2023. The Fed is trying to put the brakes on pretty hard, but it will continue into 23. Materials delays, they're certainly going to continue throughout the third quarter and are going to be pretty bumpy in the next year. Infrastructure work is increasing from the Build Back America Act and a lot of local infrastructure going in place in a growing area like Houston. Texas Medical Center 3 is underway. These are very large projects. For example, one project for Methodist Hospital alone is $1.3 billion. And these are just getting started. Houston area subdivisions are increasing very rapidly, delivering more rooftops. What happens, Houston has to have in place an on-the-ground inventory of spec homes that lasts, it's a 12-month inventory. In 2014 and 15, when oil prices dropped, the lenders redlined Houston, except for a few people. Now they're funding it like mad because there's only a 3-month supply. So we're going to see more of that work that's going to tie up concrete, steel, dirt work. K-12, $8 billion. $8 billion on local ballots this year. Labor costs appear likely to rise on a long-term basis. Energy costs, everything isn't going to go electric overnight. It's not going to happen. And the people who are advocating it aren't really in favor of expanding generation capacity or power grids, so there's got to be some kind of compromise made. Defense spending is going to be huge as a result of the war in Ukraine. Very, very big defense spending. And the things that are being said about Russian motivations for that, apparently the press doesn't read the documents that support what the real motivations are. We're having reshoring and restructuring of the supply chain that we've been talking about, and a perfect example of that is happening right here in Texas. Samsung is building a $19.1 billion chip plant, $19.1 billion chip plant in Taylor, outside of Austin. Most people know that. There's also a $1.9 billion plant going up in Columbus, a $1.4 billion plant going up in Indiana. And just before Congress passed the CHIP Act to help them build more plants, Samsung announced if the act passed, they'd build 10 more plants in Houston. That's almost $200 billion. The first plant takes 150,000 yards of concrete. Samsung's concerned enough about it where they've gone to Governor Abbott and said, there's a concrete shortage, get us the concrete. Guess who's going to get preference on concrete? What's really going on is this is also an interaction to defense. Because if you want to put the U.S. out of business, you want to kill the American military, the easiest way to do it is blow up all the chip plants, because most of them are in Formosa right now. Most of them are in Formosa. They got offshore for cost purposes. So this is both to bring them back onshore and for defense. So bringing this all together, what this really means to you and how this affects you is inflation in materials are a horizon event that lasts between 2 and 5 years. That's how long it takes to resolve some of these things. No, supply chains will be restructured. They're being done now. Infrastructure, the medical centers, subdivisions, K-12, they're a horizon event. They continue for 4 to 10 years. Typically, some of the subdivisions much longer. The labor, the energy cost, the defense, the reshoring, these are horizon events that last 15 plus years. And it's going to take that long to straighten out the labor situation and some others. What's happening? This is what your boards, your bond committees, your administrators need to know. You've got a perfect storm in place. There's a perfect storm taking place. We've seen some of these events happen before, but not in any kind of combination like this, and some of them never happened before. And all of these are going on at the exact same time. You're in a perfect storm. It's also a pivot event. Things that we have known as a paradigm are changing, because a number of these are going to change our paradigms. So what does all this mean for you in cost projections? Well, if we look at a scenario with a quicker supply chain restructure, quicker Ukraine settlement, less Ukraine consequences. Ukraine, for example, by the way, makes a lot of the automotive wiring systems. So the automotive manufacturers aren't getting as many wiring systems as they used to. If we look at the Ukraine situation, a 10 to 16% increase this year, more likely on the 16 side, 8 to 12 and 23 more likely on 12, maybe 6 to 10 and 24. But if we look at a multi-year supply chain restructure, the Ukraine consequences are longer and more severe, which is more likely increasingly, and China lockdown is extended. And by the way, the American press didn't really publicize the fact, but Wuhan, China, where COVID began, went under lockdown for COVID again on Wednesday. So hopefully they'll be able to contain it. We're looking at about a 16 to 19% increase, more likely on the 19 side. In 23, a 12 to 16%, 24, 10 to 12. Also, if we have a recession, we really don't know. Everybody's saying it's mild. And there's a very interesting study the Millikan Institute in Santa Barbara think tank came out with last week. And their thesis is that this is a white-collar recession. because of the labor statistics we've seen, it is not a blue-collar recession as we traditionally think of it. It's a white-collar recession. So all the circumstances are changing. Depends how fast the Fed puts on the brakes. 2022, 10 to 14%, most likely 14. Why? Because concrete went up with an increase on August 1st. There's another increase coming in concrete and stand on October 1st. There's another increase coming in concrete, in cement, and that'll be in January. So even if the Fed puts the brakes on, increases are coming, it's just the degree of them. So we live in very interesting times, very challenging times, and what we want to remember is that these are very, very unusual circumstances. Thank you for your time. I know it's warm. We appreciate everybody's attendance. We'll be happy to answer any questions anybody has.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks very much, Bob. We appreciate everybody joining us today. One thing I did forget to mention is a localsnapshot.com is where the full cost report is housed. So check that out, whether you're looking now on your phones or when you get back to the office, a localsnapshot.com. Question?
I just want to make a couple of announcements. Okay? As you all know, we're the Gulf Coast chapter, and we're members of the Southern region. The Southern region is represented on the international and the global boards by our representation. Our newest director is our own Lisa Cassidy. Announcement is the international board is going to be held in Texas this year. It's going to be in San Antonio, October 5th through the 9th. Go to learningscapes-A4LE and find out the information to get a golf team, to get a booth, to be in San Antonio this year to represent the Southern region at the international board. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you for those notes. And I guess with that, our program's concluded. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. Special thanks to our sponsors, Durotech for lunch, Satterfield and Pontikes, and VLK for our event sponsors. So thanks, everybody, for coming out.